over to the ice maker and he's getting water, right? And he's like, stopping. The water just coming out the valve, broke open. The refrigerator was like a month old.
No, it's in stock.
And I was like, oh crap.
One. Welcome to the Tuesday, November 4th, 2014 Abington School Building Committee meeting. First item of, not on the agenda, but first item on my personal agenda is to thank all of you. Clearly, not without your hard work and dedication over the past 2 years, we would not have had the consensus from the community that we saw in the vote, and I think all of you guys should be commended for that. So I want to personally thank and congratulate all of you. Next item of business is an approval of the July 29th School Building Committee meeting minutes. They're included in your packet for your review.
Motion to approve. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any discussion? Opposed? Hearing none. The minutes of July 29th, 2014 are approved. Next item of business on the agenda is, let's go back to the agenda, is the OPM designer contract amendments. Just to walk through the process logistically before I turn it over to Mary to review the...
Rich, can I just give the MSBA update first?
Yes.
So we talk about how we're getting to that next.
Absolutely, please do.
Yeah. So I just wanted to give you an update on the MSBA process first. We've had a lot of activity over the last couple of weeks. As you know, we had a positive vote from the local community, and following that vote, LaFawn, along with Leanne Adams, did a lot of work to get the documentation that we needed for MSBA to continue the process on the project scope and budget agreement. So what we did is we submitted the documentation as requested, including the certifications of the votes, both for special town meeting and the ballot vote. Since that time, MSBA has processed those documents and returned yesterday an executed project scope and budget agreement. What is also required for us to move forward in the process into design development, that's our next phase, is DESE approval. As part of our schematic package, I think you'll remember, we had to submit a sub-package to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education explaining our process, program, and room layouts within the new building for special education delivery. That has been under review by DESE since the summer, and on October 27th we received that approval, saying that they agreed with the plan that was proposed and that we should proceed with design based on that plan. So at this point, the steps we have moving forward is that we need to formalize contract amendments for both the designer and for the OPM for the project. As part of your feasibility study schematic design process, you did a selection of architect and OPM. That selection was just for the feasibility study and schematic design phase. In order to move forward, you now have to process an amendment for each of those contracts to include into the contract the fees and the language of the contract to address design development, construction documents, bid, construction administration, and the closeout period for the project. AI3 and our office, KBA, has proposed amendments to the contract. Those amendments are in accordance with the budgets that were submitted for the project scope and budget agreement and with your town meeting vote, line for line, and both of the fees proposed by AI3 and by our office are below the values that MSBA uses as their kind of line item assignment on the percentages of fees for the project. So at this point moving forward, once we have the amendments executed, if agreed to by the building committee, we will then enter a process called the project funding agreement process. That's the next level of agreement with MSBA and the district. It will be the final agreement that you have with the district until you get to the completion and audit phase. And basically, again, you're reconfirming your scope, your budget, your schedule, certain schedules that were in the project scope and budget agreement, and MSBA is clearly defining what their reimbursement rate will be moving forward and their criterion for submission of bills and reimbursement on the grant itself. So at this point, we would also, if the contract agreements are approved by the committee, would like to start to move forward on our design development phase. I think once we get through the process of looking at the amendments, the AI3 would probably want to talk to you, and I would also like to present to you what we would propose if those amendments are approved, the schedule to move forward for the next phase, which we would aim to submit a little bit earlier to MSBA than we did in the original project scope and budget phase, just because the town meeting vote came a little bit sooner than we had expected originally. So with that, I'll let you talk about the amendments. I don't think so.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask the professional teams to actually step out of the room, KBA and AI3. Wanted to take a minute with the committee prior to making any recommendation for the contract amendments, just to allow the committee to speak freely and provide any input or any thoughts that they had in regard to the professional team. Obviously, an approval of the designer contract amendments is us moving forward with the professional team, both the OPM and the designer that we've had throughout the feasibility study. I personally feel that they've done a tremendous job. I don't think we would have been as successful in getting such clarity and such a uniform decision from the community had we not had such a tremendous team representing us. But I did want to allow the committee to speak freely and openly without them being present, should there be any questions or if anyone has any thoughts regarding them. So I would like to open it up for discussion. Andy?
So if we approve these amendments, that means that these folks are on for the
Correct.
remainder of the project,
We'll
correct?
proceed with them for the remainder of the project. That is correct.
Is there any requirement that we rebid this or send it out for additional
No.
proposals? Or?
No, we're actually, by me doing this, we're probably taking a more formal procedure than other communities typically do. You know, again, I think from a transparency perspective, you know, I think we want to follow the proper protocol and ensure that, you know, the committee has been happy with the professional team that we've had. I haven't received any indication from the committee or the community at large that there's been anything but pleased with the representation. But again, you know, we do want to essentially ratify the fact that we are going to move forward, or that, you know, if the committee feels appropriate, that we will move forward. So I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to speak freely about that.
The costs are a percentage of the project. It's a pretty standard Massachusetts equation that they use that gives you the designer costs based on the dollar amount for the project.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all in the workup that was already created, that we already approved in the feasibility piece. And so MSBA then provides you really, like almost like an opt-out. So if you had a bad relationship or you did not like the work that was being done by your designer team, you can get out as a community. But, you know, moving forward this way with an amendment to go forward is what was described to me as standard practice.
Thanks.
Michael?
I don't know if you know this, but per the state's OPM guidelines, I'm just kind of curious, this project, they have 5 different groups, and each one predicates the percentage of the design fee for the project. So I'm interested in what group this project's considered in 1 through 5, and what would be the actual percentage of the design fee for the project. In each one of those groups, there's a different percentage for the design fee. And I don't remember the exact figures, but I think it varies between 5 to 7.5% of the project.
So if you're, my memory is if you're building something like a prison or a hospital, it's so much more, design intensive. They have a higher percentage, and if you're building something like a school, it's less, or if you're doing like a roof project, it's less. But Mary would probably be able to answer that question.
Yeah, and I think we can, contingent upon receiving an answer to that question, we could certainly have Mary come back in and provide an answer to that question. Again, the line items and the cost associated with them were already in the approved budget, so it would essentially be her clarifying a response to that question, but I don't think the answer would necessarily dictate whether or not we're moving forward with the amendments. Kathy?
I'd just like to say that I found both groups to be very responsive, very easy to work with, very thorough in everything that they've done. And we've been out, we've looked at the buildings that AI3 has built. And of all the buildings we've looked at, I know from my perspective, I thought their construction was superior. And in terms of working with them, it's been phenomenal. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Drew?
Rick, in my other life, when I worked with the courts, I dealt personally with two of the largest architects in the world, Ayan Tay and Moshe Safdie. And they were the most arrogant people I ever met. They were just dictatorial. They listened to a judge, and whatever the judge said, they designed that way without creating everything. I will speak later on when we get to writing specifications about building a building near water. And that was the Moakley Courthouse. There was rats in there and everything else. So these two organizations, I was very pleased and happy with working with them and their knowledge also.
Thank you. John?
This is my third building committee in this town, and I am incredibly impressed with Mary Mahoney and our project manager. And I echo what you've said about the architects and project manager. Frankly, I think it was those two decisions from this committee were two of our best decisions. Not only for the quality of the work, but I also, it's the value of their public speaking and their presentations to the public was incredible for this project. I think really they answered every question that every resident had very thoroughly, very honestly, and I think that credibility brings a lot to this project. I'm all in favor of it. We have a right as a town, as you said, we could go say we're not happy with these guys and we're going to go out to bid and solicit other proposals for new architects, but I have no hesitation in the world in sticking with KBA and AI3. I do have a couple of questions about what's in the contract, just some small details, so we're all aware of a couple of things, but they'll have my vote without hesitation.
Any further discussion? Okay, do we have a motion to proceed with the contract amendments?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any further discussion? Opposed? None? All right, we will proceed with the OPM and designer contract amendments. I will also note that in every instance that we've met with the MSBA throughout this process, the MSBA, who deals with hundreds of school building projects throughout the Commonwealth, has continued to be highly complimentary and remind us how fortunate we are to have the professional team that we have in place. So they have given their unofficial seal of approval, if you will, as well. So I'll invite the professional team back in. Michael, I'd encourage you to re-ask that question regarding the contract, and I'm sure Mary will provide a response. Thank you, Rick.
Contract? Yeah, I don't ask them. Majority vote.
I'm going to ask you to answer the question.
Roger, you didn't.
Re-ask the question.
I understand.
Thank you very much.
Yes, no. Michael, if you want to re-ask your question regarding the grouping.
Yeah, I was just curious, per the state's standard OPM guidelines, they categorize the projects group 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the designer fees are kind of predicated on what type of project it is. And I'm more curious, what is the actual percentage of the designer's fee for this project?
I think it's 7.2%,
Okay.
which is below that chart that you're talking about.
Yeah, I believe the group 1 was like 7.5.
Yeah, and the thing that's difficult about that, Michael, is that that chart was a standard that was once used by BBC, which was the predicator to DCAM. And it was a chart that was supposed to indicate, new construction is easier than renovations and additions, and certain renovations and additions are easier than other renovations. Phased occupied is more difficult. The problem that chart doesn't display, and it's a consideration for this, even though both OPM and the architect are below the standards that DCAM is set for fees, is it does not include the documentation process that we have to do for MSBA projects. Those fees and percentages were based more on like DCAM projects or local projects under local control. In this process, both the OPM and the architect have a much greater documentation reporting process and collaboration process with MSBA. So you would typically see, and you will see on MSBA's charts on their website, that their OPM and their designer fees typically are slightly higher. They average in the, I'd say 10 to 11% zone for most of their projects. And if you look on your website, you'll see that. Most OPMs are up over 3%, up to 3.5%. So that scale it's a good starting point, but it's not a complete apples to apples comparison to what the performance requirements are on an MSBA project. But that being said, both OPM fees and the architect's fees are still on the low side of the scale that you're talking about.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, do you want to tell them what our vote was before we ask questions? Hold it for I have a couple of quick questions. But first of all, just for the record, these are project amendment, these contracts are actually the MSBA contracts.
Yeah, it's a standardized MSBA contract, and under your original contracts with the OPM and the designer, it only covered certain phases up to schematic design.
Right.
This amendment not only includes the fees that are associated with the later design phases, the DD, CDs, and then construction administration, it also adds the language of those phases from MSBA standardized contract as an amendment to the contracts you have presently. Because otherwise you would have definitive sections of MSBA's contract missing because you didn't execute it in the original documents.
Right, I just want people at home to know that you guys didn't draft this document.
We cannot change a single word
Right.
in any of those documents.
Right, so this is the contract we'd be going with no matter which architect or project manager we hired essentially.
Yes, and the reason that MSBA does not include these certain contract provisions in the original contracts is because they have different provisions for design bid build, which is the process we're following for this project, and they have separate and different provisions for CM at risk,
Yep.
which is an option that we have decided we're not going to pursue. So they prefer that you wait until you get to the stage you're at now, you've determined your bid process you're going to pursue, and then you incorporate the appropriate language for the project that you're building.
So I had just two minor questions with some projects that had come up years ago, just if you can tell me what's in the contract specifically. Is there a limit to the number of meetings that either the architect or the project manager will attend for this project, or do you attend it as needed until we're done?
As needed until you're done, based on the closeout provisions in the contract. There is a certain period both that architect, OPM, and contractor have to agree that we're going to close the project out within a certain period of time after substantial completion. So meetings required to properly move forward with the project will be attended to. You won't be getting hit with extra services, and based on the performance of AI3, I can honestly say that there's never ever been an issue with them with regard to meeting attendance, because meeting attendance is required to get the project that you need and you desire for your town. So we definitely want to attend those meetings and make sure that the process and the public is aware of what we're doing.
Right. And I have full faith in you guys. I just wanted to make sure it's a
No, I know what-
budgeting issue.
Yeah, and I know what you're referring to, Sean, because the standard AIA contract, American Institute of Architects contracts, and others attempt to limit and be very specific about the number of meetings that
Right.
the architect or an owner's project manager, in the case of their contract, would attend. But when the MSBA generated their boilerplate contract, they had a lengthy discussion about things like that and realized it was very complicated for public owners who didn't know if they would need 10 meetings or 100 meetings to be able to establish that criteria. So in many areas like that of past contracts, they have modified the language, and I would say in all instances to benefit and protect the owner, and the MSBA, to make certain that there are no unknowns
I
like
was just going
that.
to say the same thing. That's good to hear, because then that means the town is protected to avoid certain overages that we might not anticipate. And I think this probably answers my second question, which would be, I know you guys have we all have a lot of intensive work in the next 4 or 5 months to actually do all the contract specs and the actual design documents, and then we're going to go out to bid. And God forbid the bids come in a little high above our
We have to
budget.
redesign at no additional cost to the town.
That's
Yeah.
my next question.
That's the other hot topic that, in past, before the MSBA came along with their boilerplate contract, there would be all these debates about what happens if the architect and the OPM design a project and it's over budget. Is it your problem? And the answer is no. The boilerplate contract clearly indicates that we're responsible for designing the budget, and in the event that the project is over budget, you have a variety of different options, but one of them is to ask us to go back and redesign the project to budget at no additional cost to the town.
I'm satisfied.
Can I
Yes.
ask a question that I hope you take as a compliment? We'll be working with this professional team. You don't have a B team that comes in now, but
They're
Well,
on the.
we had no idea. We had no idea you were going to pass this project, so we really didn't have a team at all. It's not even a B team. No, yes, we are the faces you'll continue to see. We do have other teams in the office. It's not just us, but we like to remain consistent throughout a project. And quite frankly, this has been the kind of project that you would want to follow through on. I mean, this group has gone from a group of really talented professionals in their own right, but really rookies in terms of the process of getting a project through the MSBA and town support, to now veterans of the process, incredibly successful veterans of the process. And you're going to find that your neighboring towns are going to start to call on you guys now as the experts on how to educate the community and engage the community on a project to gain support. So we'd certainly want to continue that incredibly successful relationship.
So just to confirm, the committee voted unanimously to approve contract amendments and proceed with both the OPM and design services from KBA and AI3. So with that,
So welcome aboard.
yeah. Welcome back.
Yeah.
After you brief for reprieve. Mary, would you like to review the design process and schedule going forward?
Yes, over the last couple of weeks, I've had conversations with AI3 with regard to, as I said earlier, amendments we might have to the process leading to bid, based on the fact that our vote came about 4 weeks or more early. And based on that, we are projecting at this point to finish 100% design development documents on January 16th, at which time we would send them to our cost estimators to do a reconcile cost estimate, similar to what we did in schematic design phase, with a projection of submitting the 100% DDs in February 16th of 2015. That's at least a month ahead of schedule. I think it's a little bit better than that. And with that being said, it does mean that we are going to need to start to pick up our working session meetings again pretty quickly, so that we can start to talk about further development and refinement of the designs that we've proposed thus far. Based on that, we would then project to submit the 60% CDs, construction documents, June 1st, 90% construction documents, August 14th, 100% construction documents, August 31st, and the bid would soon follow thereafter.
Who are we submitting these to?
MSBA.
One of the-
They still have to do their reviews similar to what we've done in the previous submissions.
One of the really nice things about the creation of the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and sometimes it does feel like a burden to satisfy so many requirements to get the funding, but there was a time when these submissions were provided to an owner like yourself, and a few people on the committee certainly have technical expertise, but the responsibility for reviewing, you know, a 60, 70, $80 million project is completely unrealistic to place on a volunteer committee. And with the MSBA in place, you really have the assistance of their entire staff. When these submissions go into them, they literally turn through every single section, every single category of work, and come back to us with constructive criticism, questions, et cetera, on everything in those documents. So there's no responsibility on the part of the town or the committee to review those submissions, but it's really just the checks and balances system that MSBA put in place to protect and assist the town.
How quickly does the MSBA vote on these different stages of the design development or construction development? Because you mentioned 90% was August 14th, and then 100% was August 31st. I don't know how often they meet. Might it be some of those dates might get bumped up? Or?
We don't have to go to any more meetings. We're done with the board meetings. That was completed once we got the project scope and budget approval. At this point, what we'll be doing is putting packages together for our project team, who's assigned by MSBA. At times, that project team does a review, or sometimes MSBA, based on the amount of workload they have, might outsource it to one of their third-party reviewers. It is expected that in a 2 to 3 week period that they would perform the review, and then they would forward us their information. Similar to the process that we had during preferred schematic and also early schematic submission, we'll keep working forward on the next phase once our submissions are completed, and then we respond to their comments. But the expectation is that we would submit 2 to 3 weeks later, they would respond with their comments, but in that 2 to 3 week period, we're continuing to advance our design so that we're really not having a big stopgap between submission and a formal approval from them.
So I'm just trying to look ahead based on August 31st. So if it's a 2-week approval, we're into about mid-September. So based on the fact that it was fully approved the middle of September, how long would the bid period be?
Between 5 and 6 weeks for the bid period.
So now we're about November 1st.
Yep.
And then you'll have approval of GC contract and everything. So when is it realistic that construction would actually start?
Typically, unless there any kind of protest, we would have a contractor signed up and ready to go by December 1st. That's not the best time, as you know, Mike, to get into construction, which maybe is your point. It's kind of the schedule we've got to work with. We don't know exactly what the contractor might be accomplishing in those first 3 months. It will be somewhat weather dependent, but it generally takes him, even if he's signed up and ready by December 1st, and he's super energetic, we still often see that it takes, 30, 60, 90 days for them to get fully mobilized and ready on site anyway. My guess is that any contractor that ultimately is selected on our particular schedule will spend that first 2 to 3 months trying to finalize and procure all his materials, all his resources, and get everything set up, and would probably be waiting until the break of the weather to truly start some site work. We've seen some in a mild winter get very aggressive with site work. Some of the bigger site work contractors, certainly the one we just had in Hingham, who also did Franklin, don't seem to even hesitate in the winter time. So it kind of depends on the contractor and who they're using as a site contractor. In some instances, winter really seems to make no difference to them.
I know this is looking ahead quite a bit, but based on our discussion we just had, might there be any consideration to some accelerated timelines for that? Signing up the documents, the submittals, the mobilization by the contractor. I mean, at that point of the season, each week or every couple of weeks can be crucial. So I know it's looking ahead, but that might be something you'd want to consider, some accelerated timelines to get somebody on the job quicker in that, latter part of the season.
Accelerated timelines in terms of getting out to bid and get him signed up quicker, or accelerated timelines in terms of encouraging him to mobilize immediately upon contract execution?
Yeah, the process after the bid.
Yeah, we can certainly include in the documents that it's our expectation that he would mobilize and complete site work during that period of time. And we can establish a milestone if we wanted to for, say, February, where we would expect that a certain amount of that site work be done, so that we don't get somebody who attempts to do the scenario one that I described, sort of sit back a little bit initially. And we could certainly the way to handle that would be, the specific way to handle it would be to establish a project construction milestone in February that had very specific criteria with regard to how much development we would want to see on the site by that time.
One thing I would state though, Mike, is that this is public construction. So it does take time to get through the process. It does take time for contractors to get all their documentation in. Just because a contractor may be the low eligible bid at the bid date doesn't mean necessarily that that's the final person we're going to get. We have to evaluate that bidder also at the time of the bid to make sure they're not overtaxing themselves with workload. We also have to make sure that they get all their insurances in for the town so that they're properly protected. And we have to make sure they comply with MVE, WBE requirements or goals, participation goals for the project. So I also want to have, a little bit of a discussion on that takes time. I've been on a ton of projects where, we thought we could turn around contracts and all this documentation like 2 weeks, boom, and this is a May bid, and you say, oh, by mid-June we'll be going, and then all of a sudden, the insurance policy takes longer than you expect, or the bond takes longer than you expect. We can push them, but we also have to understand there is a reality in the time it takes to get the proper documentation to execute a contract, and we do not want to execute that contract until we have that documentation. If we don't have the MBE, WBE goal information, you could jeopardize a portion of your grant. So, we want to be prudent and careful as we move forward also.
Which question? Yeah. These dates, Mary, that you gave starting January 16th, are those self-imposed or are those through NSBA? Or
Self-imposed.
Okay.
Yeah, what we tried to do is work around the Christmas vacation break, realizing that we're going to lose a lot of the administrators and the school staff during that time. So we really put somewhat of a break in there where we know the AI3 will be working on things, we'll be working on things, but be an expectation the staff might not be available. Working with Troy, we kind of looked at the same thing through the February vacation week and the April vacation week, and realistically when staff was leaving in June. So we're trying to keep everyone's schedule in mind, so it's a realistic goal for all of us to meet.
Thanks.
Any additional questions on the design schedule? Okay. Mary, if you could provide a budget update?
Basically, what I've done is I've taken the budget that we included in the project scope budget, and I have now reported in the committed line item, which is what we're going to be doing throughout the process, is the amendments to be executed for the designer services contract and for the OPM contract. You can now see that I've carried over the dollar values that are being committed to in those amendments. So those include the A&E base contract dollar values from design development through closeout. Same with project management from design development through closeout, cost estimates. And then the extra services that, there are certain extra services that AI3 has listed as extra services, which mean they cannot proceed without the committee's authorization to do so, and we will make presentations to you before we move forward with any of these. But they're all areas that we expected when we put the original budget together that we'll need to do, and those include structural inspections and building tests that are required by the Mass State Building Code once we're into the construction, hazmat monitoring, which we know we're going to need to do the demolition at the high school building, geotech, geoenvironmental, as we've talked before, we need to do borings and we need to do wetland surveys, etc. Same with a site survey, we need to do a final survey to be able to incorporate all as-built information into the project documents. Wetlands, a traffic study or other studies that might be required by public safety or other town officials, and reimbursables for their printing expenses and production expenses and other items that may come along. Again, anything that's under the extra services, we would make a presentation to you before we would move forward with any of those items.
Mary, what's sustainable in other services?
That really comes down to a number of items that we've talked about with regard to looking at additional lead credits, whether we would do any kind of wells on the site, concession stand design possibly if we did that, or other items. It's a little bit of a multi-item assignment for now.
Thank you.
If I could just ask one question that I should have asked a few minutes ago. Scott, how's the construction market during this time frame that we will be out there?
I think that it will be good. It's such a small market when you are speaking to projects of this size and contractors that are qualified to bid Massachusetts Public Work. There's many contractors that could bid it, but there are probably only 4 that will bid it really aggressively. And certainly we've already been in conversations with all of those, and it does appear that there aren't that many projects that'll be out there and available. Again, within that arena of public construction, Chapter 149, publicly bid, and of this size and magnitude. And so all of them are very much interested in the small handful of projects that will be out there. So I think that we'll get a lot of competition among the key players. But you should be aware that certainly construction inflation for the last 3 to 4 months and for the projected future is more aggressive than we've seen it probably in the last 3 years. So the sooner we can get out, the better, and we'll have to be very conscious as we continue to develop the project with all the cost estimating that's going to be done. I can assure you that there's going to be a balance between making sure that we design to budget and still, have all of the quality, et cetera, that we want. Will be a process at each stage of the submission that Mary described. We'll be taking a really close look at that.
These 4 contractors who you think are capable of doing it, have you worked with them before?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mary, can you remind me what the final feasibility study expenses were in relation to budget?
We were 28,000, I think $263 below budget.
28,000 under budget. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions regarding the budget update? Okay, hearing none. Is there any general business or items not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance? Okay. Scheduling future meetings. Mary, what would be an appropriate timeline for scheduling of the next meeting as well as working sessions?
Next meeting, I'd like to go in a month. Is that
Hmm.
good for you guys too? A month between? That would either be December 2nd or December 9th.
Both dates are fine for me. Is there any school conflicts that you're aware of, Peter?
December 2nd or none?
Correct.
I don't see anything.
So why don't we make it for the 2nd?
I don't
Okay.
have anything, any of the concert season and all that stuff, but I don't have those.
We're not gonna be able to find necessarily a time that's gonna be perfect for everybody because there are different building level responsibilities for different administrators depending on, but I don't see anything major.
Okay. All right, so we'll proceed with December 2nd.
And then if we could also schedule it for January 6th.
I think we have, we have school committee that night.
Do you want to move it to either the 8th or the 13th?
January 8th is fine for me.
They both look good.
He's not good for me, but
We'll send you the minutes.
thank you. Be a shorter meeting.
So we're setting it for the 8th?
January 8th, 2015.
Same time, 6:30?
Had we been doing 6 previously, Mary?
Yes.
I had asked if we could meet at 6:30 because I had a conflict. I'm very comfortable going back to 6 PM if that works better for the committee. I know there's some people that probably are staying here from work and would prefer to get home sooner, so if there's no objections, I would propose 6 PM for both meetings.
No problem.
Okay.
Thursday, January 8th, Tuesday.
We'll try to get the police station and then confirm with everybody
Okay.
if available.
All right, so just to confirm, December 2nd, 2014 at 6 PM, January 8th, 2015 at 6 PM, tentatively scheduled for here at the Abington Police Station, and we'll confirm the location. Should we attempt to schedule working sessions, or do we need to do any prior to now in the December meeting?
No, I think we do need to do so.
Okay.
Yeah. When do you guys want to start?
Couple of weeks.
Next, 15th, or the 14th or the 21st.
We have a meeting. Steve, but we could reschedule it.
If we're going with the Friday mornings at 7:30, we rescheduled our meeting on the
Yeah, we could reschedule that.
14th, I could, but then I also have another meeting on the 21st. That's up to me.
I'd kind of like to see us start on the 14th just because we could get the 14th and the 21st in, and then it's the holiday week, so then we're going to lose that week to meet probably.
Yeah, but you're not available on the 21st.
But
I could be available first.
I'm then around the 21st too.
And so
Felicia, you are or not?
I'm
sorry.
available
Okay.
both of those days.
we're gonna reschedule the 14th.
Yeah, we'll have to talk to him and reschedule.
What meeting is
Okay.
The weekly working group,
Oh,
or the bi-monthly?
which would be what?
We're talking about 7:30.
7:30 AM.
Oh, okay.
12:14, and then 12:21.
11.
11.
11, excuse me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, what, 11, the 11th?
We are looking to schedule our first working group meeting on 11/14 at 7:30 a.m.
Thank you.
November 14th.
Correct.
Correct. That's a Friday morning, correct.
And the next one is the 21st.
Correct.
Next one is November 21st?
Correct.
Correct. So is that what we're doing?
Yes. Okay, so, just to confirm again, November 14th, 7:30 a.m. at the North School, followed by a November 21st working group meeting at 7:30 a.m. also at the North School. Okay. Any additional business for the committee? Hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
It was touch and go there for a minute.